So good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our tech session around how Greymatter solves problems such as multi-cloud workload observability, certificate management, and other common pains that are common in our industry. Before we get started with the tech session, we have a couple of quick housekeeping items to go through. Number one, feel free to ask questions in chat. We will answer them during the session if it's a pretty simple question, but if it's a little bit deeper, we'll probably wait till the end of the session and go through it and have our team just kind of walk you through to help answer the question. And then secondly, if there are any visibility issues or if there are any hearing issues with the Zoom, please let us know in chat and we'll work to adjust to that. So those are the two quick housekeeping items. And so I'm going to get into some quick introductions and then we'll go right into the overview. My name is Mark Josephson and I work alongside an amazing technical team who will be sharing the Greymatter story with everyone today. Leading the session is Billy Miller. Billy is a seasoned veteran of 20 years in the federal intelligence community. His background is in the enterprise and solution architecture and software delivery lifecycle management space. His experiences at Red Hat, Amazon, and Harness led him to Greymatter because he was looking at the Greymatter solution to solve many of the problems with his customers in those orgs. Also joining the chat today is Joe Pichette. He has over 25 years of experience in the field of networking, security, database, and storage as a solutions integrator, engineer, and architect. His expertise is designing and implementing robust solutions in complex environments. In the past 5 years, he's been on the forefront of cloud native and Kubernetes and service mesh industries, and he'll be leading the chat alongside us today. So without further ado, first, thank you again for everybody for joining, and we're going to turn it over to Billy, who will be going over the tech session today. So it's all yours, Billy.
Thanks, Mark. Appreciate it. Thanks everyone for being here. Wherever you are in the world, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Start by some of the principles, focus, and facts about why we're here, who we are, where we came from, why we're relevant, really. We're founded outside of Washington, D.C. in 2015. We're widely deployed throughout the mission, defense, and critical agencies, even intelligence environments. That would be my background. We're venture-backed by Elsewhere Partners out of Austin, Texas. And then we actually have the longest running subject matter expertise when it concerns what we do in the field. So I'll work my way from right to left here to kind of show and highlight some of the focal areas driven by our principles. You'll see on the right-hand side, and I won't read each one bullet for bullet, but disaster recovery is a native part of what we do. It's very easily configured, and we'll kind of go over that during the demo. Multi and hybrid cloud control. This is a big one, right? So how do we coalesce the individual disparate environments into one unified interface that you can actually use and leverage going forward? We're polyglot in nature, so we don't care how your application is written. We sit outside of that bound. Pervasive zero trust. So one of the biggest things that Greymatter really provides is the capability for you to institute principles of zero trust, and even in this new concept called cybersecurity mesh architecture. And then the policy posture and playbook management part of what we do is really taking good CI and CD principles, developer focus, kind of software development lifecycle things, agile, and then moving that into a network configuration space and decoupling that necessarily from the actual development work cycle. So you're increasing the capability for developers to do what they do, write code, right? And then decoupling that. So we extend business value, revenue stream, and business continuity by instituting those principles. Just to dive a little bit into what makes up Greymatter, we'll talk about some of those layers. The enterprise integration, orchestration, we do service networking under the hood. That's how we're stitching together all of these individual services. I think we're all familiar at this point now with what a microservice is, and we're trying to get to that point, and many organizations are still stuck somewhere in between. And then you're adding a layer of zero trust on top of that, which adds complexity to that decoupling of services. But then you need to also do analytics on top of that. So we look at this as like a layered cake situation where we provide a lot of that underneath of what Greymatter's capability is, in conjunction with some of these things on the right-hand side under the platform section, is that we can do traffic control. We bubble up heuristic information in the form of an intelligence layer, identity mesh fabric, in that we can take information about the who, what, when, where, and how of who you are, and then present that up in such a way that you can actually make decisions based on what you're seeing. And then the NetSecOps automation is part of that GitOps sort of framework that we're following for good SDLC lifecycle management. We're all doing this as well, though, on top of this multi-hybrid cloud reality that's now sort of making its way into the industry. So whether you're running on AWS or Azure or GCP or even on-prem, where we have some of our customers today running in their own kube environment, maybe OpenShift, how do I get introspection and understanding into all of that? And then the second part of that, which you'll notice on the 3 bullet down under our advantages side, how do I push all that information to a threat intelligence capability, like a SIEM or a SOAR, your Splunks of the world, AppD, New Relic, stuff like that. How do I take all of that, make sense of it, and then use it? So a lot of that would be done through your knock and sock watch offices who are seeing what's going on, and we'll sort of see that when we go over to the demo and I show the UI. The second part of that is some of the advantages that make up what we do, and I mentioned it earlier, was the zero trust nature, putting all of the capability of certificate management, certificate rotation, automating that under the layers, for which really takes away pain from the platform engineering team, takes pain away from the DevOps engineer who is now forced to take on a lot of these things. And then also for the network engineer who is now finding themselves sort of relinquishing that stitching together of what apps can talk to what VPCs potentially can talk to others, and giving that over to a platform team, or them being integrated in such a way that now they need to be proficient. So faster delivery from dev to ops, from months to hours, we put that down there because that's a reality that our customer has seen. Placing Greymatter in front of their application offloads the responsibility of developers to institute things like TLS or MTLS in their app for the stitching together of those services. Now you're taking that outside of the app, decoupling that, and that just becomes part of an attachable or detachable sort of certificate-enabled connection point. So that principle of zero trust, that shift left mentality, only give required access to the people who actually are supposed to be making those decisions. And then the last one we put in there, and this is from a recent survey that was done through GigaOM, that you can see there on the right-hand side in the graph, that Greymatter is inching our way closer and closer in the center of that matrix in between the innovation and platform play level, and we're actually named as an outperformer in what we do as a space. So it's built on cloud native principles and open source technologies, right? We leverage some AI and ML as part of the information that's underneath to bubble up heuristics, and then providing that audit layer and compliance and reporting on top of all that, where a lot of that you may have to stitch together yourselves with some open source capability and then figure out how that works across many different clouds. So with that, I'll hop over to Greymatter UI right now. We'll kind of work our way from top to bottom, talk about what's what, and then kind of dive into maybe some of the configurations and how we're doing this. You'll notice up on the top left-hand side, 3 boxes. Those 3 boxes are actually indicating 3 different environments that we have services or applications deployed to, but we can visualize and look at them directly from our user interface. So you'll notice AKS up here, EKS. We even have an Istio box in here from an application that's sitting outside of those. But even think of things like on-prem, where you have maybe an OpenShift cluster running with many different namespaces. We can pull all of that information in here as well. And then you get all of the services that make up your entire ecosystem application. So if I were to point this back to a commercial organization, maybe you have many different business units all running inside of a cloud, maybe across many different ones, and they each have their individual views within the respective CSPs. We can pull them all into one place, and now you have an opportunity to look at what's going on across my entire ecosystem and to make better decisions based on what we know. Working our way down a little bit, you'll notice these 3 boxes, the stable, warning, and down state. That's just showing the state of the service in the environment in which it's in. And this really gives a SOC and a NOC operator the capability to look up quickly and say, okay, I see everything is healthy or not healthy. What do I do based on that? This little cardiogram symbol down here is the what do I do about that kind of thing. So if I hop into an application, we'll filter and we'll look through and we'll say, all right, we want to look at book info. It's an application that we have out here. And I want to see the health data around the front end product page. I can start looking at this and saying, all right, health looks good. What are my connection rates? What's the request limit? What are my dependencies, right? This is a big portion of what makes things work and what makes them not work. So if product page were to go down, I would want to know what the root cause analysis that made product page go down. We can see right here that there's 2 services that it's dependent on running in order for it to be okay. That would be ratings V1 and V2. If either one of those are go down, it's going to throw product page in this warning bucket and say, hey, product page is down, but this is the root cause of why it's down. The rating service is down, and maybe you need to call that developer in to potentially fix that. It could be a database problem. It could be anything. We bubble that information up for you to actually use. And one thing I passed over really quickly was the business impact. You can associate business impact with a given service, so you can start bucketizing what services are maybe critical, high, medium, or low, and then making decisions based on that business impact. I look at this through a lens when I was at AWS about, as a TAM, what services are actually the most important? What services have I paid a lot of money for them to be on instance sizes that maybe are being underutilized? And we'll kind of talk about that next. If I were to jump into a service, which I already have one open here, and then product page V2, you'll see that we can show the memory utilization and CPU utilization of the underlying worker node in which that service resides on. So this gives you a good idea as how is my service performing against the infrastructure that's it's sitting on. And then we can even go deeper into how is the route information and the API, maybe endpoints, how are they performing based on what we know of traffic going to this service. So if I were to map sort of back in your heads to what the card detail is to the application front end, we call these cards, and they're individual services that make up the application book info. This is the book info application itself, and you'll notice we have details, we have the rating service, we have a review service, and these are all individual distinct pieces that is looking at the card level information and data. And you can see I can flip through here. We have 2 different services running. The cool part about this is how we configure that. So we do it through a language called GSL. And then what's nice about this is we can build out the scaffold framework very easily with a couple lines of Greymatter init. So we have our own CLI, and what I'll do actually is build out that scaffold after I show what's going on here and how we're kind of stitching together to show you the ease of how that happens. So I mentioned earlier 2 different review services. We have a product page, ratings, and detail service. Each one of those services gets what we call a queue configuration, and that is the configuration that allows the service to communicate through its proxy, and that's how we understand who's supposed to talk to what, when, where, and how. About 165 lines of that stitching together process is done for you out of the box. You don't have to figure out, what the name of the card should be, how the syntax should look. This is pre-populated for you. You can come in here and edit the description. You can make any sort of edits that you want, and that is where the GitOps process comes into play. So if I were to make a change anywhere here, we could push that change up and it will come back down in the form of a configuration change, provided the right PR checker in place and that's been approved. If we work our way down, you'll notice we can add things like health options. We want this to be MTLS enabled, our ingress points over HTTP, and then we start defining what our routes are. So what are our egress routes? We want it to be details, and it's going to go over the details route. We want to make sure that service-to-service communication happens over MTLS. This is an interesting point here that we're using certificate-based in this particular scenario, but we can also do it with Spire. And we deploy our Spire server in conjunction with Greymatter when you stand up the core. And it's a matter of a Boolean toggle, whether you turn it on or turn it off. And we'll talk about that as well here in a second. Working our way down further, you can see we have reviews, and then we can actually define sort of traffic flow that we want to have happen as well. So if you think traditionally, in the SDLC CD side of delivering your application, you may offload that onto something else. Maybe you're doing it with OpenShift and you're defining what rolling deployments look like, or you're potentially doing canary style deployments in AB with some other kind of capability. We can do that all in the single definable Q file here and saying, hey, we want 50% of the traffic going to this version. We want to make sure it's secure over MTLS. We want to add some health checks in here to say, if what are the timeouts? What's the interval? What's the healthy threshold? Such that, if the service can't be reached, what do I do about that? And the what I do about that, we can actually define even further down and say, I want to have a failover instance. I want to make sure that if the two services that I have running intra-cluster or intra-namespace aren't available, I want to define another service that sits outside of that cluster, maybe even cloud service provider, and say, this other version is running in completely different environment altogether, maybe US West 1, and it's going to have a priority of 1. So we'll define what that looks like. It'll end up going over to that bridge and then work seamlessly. And I might show some of that, how we down a service and what that looks like for you as an end state operator. So let's go back to what it looks like to build out a scaffold. So I just threw this in a bash script real quick because it makes it easier to deploy and I won't have typos. I'll do a Greymatter init. You'll define the directory in which you want your project scaffold to go to, and then we'll also create the project inside of that that directory hierarchy. And then I'll initialize a service over the type HTTP. So you could define this as a TCP-based service or HTTP-based service. You want to say, this is the namespace that I want it to go to, and this is the mock service that it's going to create. So I'll run that real quick. And then what you'll notice is it builds out this, this scaffolding. And a couple of things are in here, which is neat. It builds out a Greymatter directory structure with all of the core components. We automatically give you an edge configuration. This is the ingress point into your application. So this is automatically created for you. You don't have to do anything with that, but define maybe what port you're going over. And if you have it MTLS enabled, what certificate that you're going to use. This policies folder, which is empty right now, you can define things like OPA. And we'll sort of talk about that here in a second as well. If you had a policy engine that you wanted to use via OPA, and maybe you've written some Rego, you can attach policies to a service that it now has to inherit the OPA policy for access to a given API endpoint or even a service itself. And then inside of here, you'll notice we have this test deploy. And that just creates the web front end service that we talked about earlier, which is right here. So what happened here was when we ran that, it created this templated webfront.q file. And like I mentioned earlier, creates most of the configuration for you. And the only thing you're really left to configure at this point is your routing information. Maybe Webfront talks to a different service that makes up the application. We've done a lot of the legwork for you here, and this will present itself in the form of a card like we talked about earlier. Will end up showing up here as something called like Webfront service. So with that said, if we jump in a little bit further, we can talk about how we're doing some of this configuration in the Greymatter core context. And this file is called inputs.q. And inputs.q really defines the entirety of the Greymatter deployment itself and all of the controllers that sit underneath of it, where your applications sit. What's nice about this, like I said earlier, it can be a configurable Boolean flag. So you want Spire, great, set that to true. If you want historical metrics turned on, and that be just an underlying portion of the ecosystem, then you set that to true. What's neat about this is the metrics part of this entire scenario is really painful. If you were to try and go from different cloud provider to different cloud provider, maybe an on-prem capability, you're sort of having to stitch all that stuff together, define what the logging statistic look like, not really giving any useful information right away. It takes a lot of build out yourself to make that kind of happen. We're doing that on your behalf and then bubbling all that information up. And I'll show you what the audits look like here in a second. So we'll keep going down. And what you'll notice is we do default sidecar injection. So that way it picks up say a new application is stood up in a completely different namespace, a new business unit stands itself up, and you have a front end. You define what that namespace looks like, and then Greymatter consistently looks at that namespace for any new deployments that have been made and automatically gets injected as part of the Greymatter ecosystem. So you don't have to really set up your own configurations. Greymatter is going to do that for you on the side there. So let's look at what happens, for instance, when I kill a service. And we'll sort of see that happen on the Greymatter user interface. So I will scale down both services for reviews v2 and v3. And what you'll notice is 2 cards will turn red. So it's an immediate indicator from a knock and SOC level view that something is wrong. I need to make an adjustment, or I need to go look at what's actually happening and do it in an efficient way. There was a time when I was called in many times at 2 o'clock in the morning for a potential issue that was either hardware or not. And they really had no idea what the problem was. We're giving you that information to be able to bubble up. So there it goes right there. You can see, well, I just scaled down 2 services. They're down. What is the information about these services? What's the failure statistics? What's happened? Is it something underneath? Oh, the discovery plane can't find it anymore. And we can prove that out over here on this book info web front end. We had 2 review services, black stars and yellow stars, which we talked about earlier. When I refresh this, it'll go over to red stars now, right? That is a completely different service that's sitting in a different cloud provider altogether. I didn't really have to do anything in terms of a platform engineer. This was predefined as part of the failure scenario and disaster recovery, that if something happens, what do I do about it? This is what I would call a passive failover, where there's no interaction needed from on behalf of the technical team. It just is already defined there. So we can come back in here and see that it's like this. And then what do we do about it? I can even go into the audits information and say, we have an audit set up, and we can look at the audits of all of the services that roll up underneath this platform. And you'll get a user experience. You'll get server errors, client errors, auth errors for each individual user and the activity associated with that user. So that's specifically for that cloud. Let's talk about what it looks like to attach policy or detach policy based on certificates, based on OPA. So I'll hop over there real quick and we'll talk about that. We had an application robot shop, pretty easy. It's out there. You can grab it from Instana. Does a really good job of showcasing a bunch of different services that run up under the framework of Kubernetes. I pulled up a network tab over here so we can actually see what's happening when I click some of this stuff. I have defined in my Rego as an attachable policy via OPA that all of these users, Jim, Billy, Joe, John, can all do these things, get, put, and post. They're all allowed to do it. They need to be part of the OPA groups, and they need to be part of administrator. But if they're not, what happens there, right? So we created an OPA.q, which is just the attachment point for the deployment service to talk through. And then it's using my Rego as a filter about who can access what, when, where, and how. So if I hop over here, what you'll notice, I've logged in as a user called no permissions. And that user only has access to certain things, right? I can go to robots, I can filter through them, but as soon as I try and rate one, we'll notice an immediate error over here. It says 403. It's a put. Because you're no permissions user, I can't do that. So if I were to rate a bunch, and we'll put some load in there, maybe I'll come into the login here and do some other things that I'm not allowed to do. We can hop over to Greymatter and then see the output of this information in the audits. So if I were to go over to Greymatter, we'll refresh to make sure we got the latest data. We'll filter down to the last 15 minutes. And there it is. You'll see this no permissions user has had authentication errors on the end state. What happened here, right? I can click on any of these. I can see authentication errors right here. There's been 16 for this endpoint ratings EPE 5, which actually correlates to this user that I've just done down here. So we can click over here and say, oh, all right, it's this user. He shouldn't be doing that. It really allows you to build a picture of health on the service, as well as maybe intrusion points that have been set up in terms of who's doing what, when, where, and how. This is a great metric to use if you maybe were looking for insider threats, or a service potentially stands itself up in the middle of the night and starts communicating with other services. What do we do about that, right? How do we address those sorts of problems, and then go back to a point of a good state? So that would be how we're doing auditing. We're doing it based on services. So you can look at the service level information as well, and then build a better picture of what services are most used, right? Catalog V2, Cart, and Web are the least used as part of these services from these users. Then you can start building a business case on these services don't necessarily get used. Can we potentially target them for app modernization? Maybe they're a legacy style application. You want to go to microservices. It's not used that much. The downtime and impact wouldn't cause revenue problems or mission related problems on my side. Let's target that first. Let's leave booking for production alone. That one's used all the time. We'll figure out what that looks like later. So you can see fairly easily that we can configure a lot of the complexity of what it requires to stitch together services from service to service in such a way that we are making definitions once and then reusing them across many applications more than once. And this is all done via GitOps framework. We deploy via an operator capability. So, you get operator bits, you lay it down in your environment, and then all of a sudden you now have the capability to use Greymatter in your environment with a self-defined sort of capability. So really the crux of it is this has been hard for a long time to realize the benefit of cloud service provider, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud. How do I make sense of all of this? How do I address business concerns with technical capabilities? And how would I make that a realization in my environment? And that is where we are headed right now. So it's about 11:30 now. It's about 10 minutes, 15 minutes prior to the end of demo, but I wanted to leave some time for questions if there were any, to kind of hash it out and talk through it now. And if not, this is our information. Mark and I are part of the same teams, as well as Joe. We're always here to reach out. If you need a more tailored demo, you want to get more specific in your use cases around, hey, I have this problem. We've tried X, Y, and Z. It's not worked for us. What do you have potentially that we could fix this problem with, or just partner together and figure out where we go from there. So I'll leave the floor open for now to have Q&A, and we'll sort of talk about that.
It looks like we have a few questions in chat that we could speak to. The first question is, does this work for services that are not deployed in a container? Do you want to speak on that? And Joe, you also feel free to as well. I think I make this conversation.
Yeah, great question. So we're agnostic to container-based capability, and that is the reason actually that Greymatter was developed in the beginning. With our customer that we have now, they were in that legacy monolith to microservice journey. How do I get from point A to point B when I have all of these services that aren't necessarily a container, but they are important, and I have a mandate that I need to get to a place where I am microservice based? You can't just leave the services behind because they may be very important. So we operate and deploy as a capability next to, let's say, serverless or an EC2 or VM. We proxy that same information and traffic through that sidecar capability into the Greymatter ecosystem. And that may be true of an application that uses on-prem database, or a database that's deployed to an EC2 instance or a VM somewhere, and you have other microservices that's made up that application. We're able to pull all of that together and make use of that. That's that data distribution. How do I make use of all of the data that's out there, coalesce it into one place and actually attach it?
Nice. We have another question. We have we actually have 4 of them. So we're working through how to, this is our first real time to do something in the Zoom chat. So just bear with us here. So one of the questions asked, does Greymatter handle key rotations and public key distributions across different environments? It looks like it was answered, but I want to go ahead and just double down on it and speak to it.
Yeah, either Joe or I can take this. It's fine. So key rotations and disbursement can be done through Aspire capability, and that's automatically, if you have a CA and the CA is attached to your Spire server, we can now start generating and issuing certs to the underlying services on a rotation basis that you define. So every 30 seconds or every minute, every hour, whatever that may be. And that allows you to offload the responsibility of certificate management to the system level capability, rather than you having to figure out, oh no, my front end service cert went down and now nobody can get to it. I need to find where it's at, where to drop it. You don't need to worry about that anymore. Let Greymatter configure the Spire server for you, deploy it on your behalf, and do all the certificate rotation and certs itself.
Great. Well, I'll go ahead and also speak to that. I know Joe kind of answered it in chat, but let's at least put it out in front of everybody too, if they didn't see the chat, kind of dive into it as well. Our team is looking for a solution that provides centralized user authentication across all platforms. Can Greymatter provide this?
Joe, you want to take that one since you answered before?
Yeah, so you can think of a Greymatter sort of like as a single source of truth. So sort of built in out of the boxes, we have the ability to hook into OIDC providers and different types of OIDC providers, allowing you to propagate the user attributes through the network. It's a way of being able to sort of centralize disparate sort of authentication SSO type things from different environments and pass that through to your users.
Yeah, thanks, Joe.
I'll go into another question in the chat. Does this work for services that are not deployed in a container?
Yeah. So back to that question earlier about does this work outside of a container-based solution? The answer simply is yes. We're agnostic to Kubernetes itself, although there's lots of capabilities to do prioritize Kubernetes, and I think that's the way potentially most technology are going. We can't leave behind legacy services that potentially want to get from point A to point B. So like I usually say, we want to see a need and meet a need. See where you're at and meet you where you want to be, but also understand all the implications in between.
Nice. Here's our next question. I'm trying to enhance deployment consistency across different environments. Does Greymatter facilitate, automate, and version control network configs across multi-cloud environments?
Yes. Definitely. So that's part of our GitOps framework. The underlying capability operates on this traditional software development lifecycle, agile GitOps framework, where you may have many branches associated with an application. You make network configuration changes in the same way a developer would locally. You push them up via GitOps, and that comes back down in the form of configuration change. We do that with something called a sync capability that resides in your namespace, and sync is consistently looking for configuration changes in Git. And it's doing that about every 3 seconds. And it's saying, hey, is there any configuration changes for me? And as soon as it picks up that change, it pulls down that change and then institutes that change in the mesh itself. What's nice about that is, though, in the sync logs itself, which I could probably bring up and show you in a subsequent demo, would be you can see the commit ID, the branch that's associated with that, and the user identification of who made that commit. So back to the point of zero trust, how do I verify, validate, and be able to poke the belly button on who did what, when, where, and how? Well, you have many streams of information to go back to now. You have the audit framework that's built into Greymatter, and you also have the commit history as part of the logging capability in sync, as well as the Git commits on Git itself. So you can correlate all of that information and get real pinpointed on who did what, when, where, and how, and there is no backing out of that.
Right, and you can even set up pull requests where you can have authentication, permissions defined by say security teams or deployment team. And then once again, I just want to point out how that's just automatically, any changes are automatically sort of synced into the environment. Your Greymatter is just sort of sitting there and listening, and will dynamically update the changes.
Yeah, the other part of this is the logging capability, and I'll just real quick touch on that. So all of the logs that come out of the network traffic itself can be pushed to a seamless stored that you're already using. Like we have customers that are using Splunk. Great, take all that information and visualize, compact, parse, however you want to split and slice and dice that data. It's yours to do with what you want. We can even enable something called full payload observability, which gives you all of the network traffic information about everything in that service, and will help you define, what the storage requirements look like for that, the data retention policy and stuff like that. So all of those capabilities are at your disposal.
Yeah, significantly simplifying the auditing part of trying to adhere to compliance, where you're pulling user information, service to service information, all of that stuff are metrics that Greymatter sort of collects, and then you can massage to make sure that you're being compliant.
Yeah, and Joe brings up a good point, the compliance part. The compliance, we were actually 100% compliant with the NIST 800-207 framework for RMF. And that's really just a requirement because we operate in the government space a lot, and they require a lot of those zero trust principles. And how do we, again, see a need and meet a need? It's a matter of requirement for us. So we've inbuilt all of the capability for that compliance in the system itself. So when we say military grade security, we mean it. So that's very valuable for when you think of verticals like FSI and energy and banking, where you have transactional information that's happening. We need to guarantee that those transactions are secure from point A to point B, and not just north south, but also east west internally to the data center itself. Are those communications relevant and valid? I mean, if there's no better example right now than what's happening with MGM, right? So that sort of stuff we are taking care of internally, the insider threat.
So that's a really good use case in real time as well that we help solve for.
Yeah,
really good point. And then we'll get to I think our last question in chat. Again, if anybody else wants to add one, they can, but we can kind of wrap up with this one. Our org has, and they capitalize has, to place a strong emphasis on compliance. How does Greymatter align with industry standards like NIST?
Yep. So the last thing I just mentioned, we're 100% compliant with NIST 800-207, which is the RMF framework for standardization and zero trust architecture, right? Zero trust means a lot of things to a lot of people. The principles by which you follow to get to that status, I am now zero trust enabled, it comes from a lot of different ways. The best evidence of that right now is our customer has been using us for many different tenants inside of our current customer base to leverage Greymatter in front of their application in such a way that now they can offload the responsibility of being NIST 800-207 compliant on Greymatter, and now they inherit all of that compliance scenario from us. So they can be in the business of generating applications and sticking them in front of Greymatter. We're doing that compliance standard on your behalf. So to answer the question with NIST, yeah, we're fully compliant with a lot of the NIST standards that are out there, 207 just being the predominant one right now.
Great. Well, we want to thank everybody for taking some time to visit with us. We tried to keep it conversational with the chat, but also we don't go away after this. So if there's any follow-up, feel free to reach out to myself and Billy. We'll also have recorded this, so we'll be sending this out as well to you if there's any questions. If you want a more personalized technical overview and kind of dig deeper into maybe some of the problems that you're having in your environment, we'd be happy to visit with you. Joe and Billy are at the ready, and we would love to schedule some time with you to learn and see how Greymatter can help solve some of these common issues that we discussed today. And again, thank you everyone for your time, and we really look forward to hopefully starting a journey with you.
Yep. So If you're in the federal side and you want to communicate about those particular issues, it's myself and also Jen Webster. So it's jen.webster@greymatter.io, or you have my email there, billy.miller@greymatter.io. So appreciate your time today.
Again, I'm on the commercial side. My name is again Mark Josephson, and I work alongside Joe, who helps engage in our commercial customers as well. So again, thank you, and we really appreciate your time. And that's all we got.